Good morning, everybody. Thank you for attending. My name is John Mulligan, and I am the Director of Market Relations and the Climate Change Lead at the World Gold Council. I also preside over the Sustainable Development Commission for CIBJO. And we're here today to talk about sustainability, sustainability principles and practices in the gold jewellery supply chain, so the whole gold value chain and jewellery. First of all, I'd like to say it's a pleasure to be here again, a real privilege, and thank you to the Italian Exhibition Group and CIBJO for the opportunity. It's also a great pleasure and privilege to share the stage with a really stellar panel of industry leaders. So I will introduce them in a second, but first, I thought I'd frame the discussion with a few slides. So don't worry, it's not going to be death by a PowerPoint. It's literally just a few slides to talk about or explain what we mean when we're talking about sustainability and responsibility principles. So the reference on that slide you saw says there's been an initiative in the gold industry called the Gold Industry Declaration of Responsibility and Sustainability Principles, what we describe as an industry statement of ambition. But the key point, I think, was how do we pull together the whole value chain from mine to market, from rock to ring, to agree what these things mean. Yesterday, we had quite a few comments about, okay, well, we're talking about responsible sourcing, but we should be talking about sustainable impacts. And there was some, I think, question around the scope and focus of our ambition. So 2 years ago, ourselves, the World Gold Council, with our good friends at the LBMA, convened an industry group to say, okay, can we agree the scale and scope and depth of our ambition? Listed on the screen now are the signatories to the declaration. Fast forward a year of conversations, discussions, negotiations, we agreed a set of principles to say this is what our sustainability objectives mean, and this is what we seek to make progress on by coming together. Now, I'm very pleased to say that on this stage, there are a number of those signatories. But you'll see it's a global group, 14 different associations and exchanges representing the whole value chain. What have they agreed to? And you'll see the signatories there. And I'm fully aware that you can't read that small print. So I will simplify it for you. Those are the main subject matter, the main focus of our statement of ambition. And I'm going to leave that on the screen because I think it allows us to say these are the various goals, value-led principles by which we will be oriented and how we'll focus. And I think I'll ask all of the panelists to consider those different goals as we have our conversation. Now, as I say, luckily you won't be hearing solely from me. I am blessed to have a really stellar panel, and I'll introduce them to you. On the far end, there's Melanie, who's the Executive Director of the Responsible Jewellery Council. Next to me is Bryony Colmoon, who's the Global Head of Safety and Sustainability Governance for Newmont Corporation. That is the world's largest gold miner, and also, I think it's safe to say, one of its most progressive in terms of sustainability performance. Next to me, we have Iris van der Veken, who's the Executive Director of the Watch and Jewellery Initiative 2030. And next to her is Sakhila Mirza, from the Executive Director of the LBMA, and we should congratulate her for being promoted to Deputy CEO as well. And at the end, we have Philip Olden, an old colleague of mine, a advisor and counsel in terms of jewellery sustainability and responsibility, also the previous president of CIBJO's Responsible Sourcing Commission, and a former MD at the World Gold Council too, so I'm amongst friends and colleagues. The first principle on that list is responsible sourcing, and we talked an awful lot about responsible sourcing yesterday. I think we may start there, and I'm going to start with you, Philip, at the end. You've been I won't say how long, but you've been in the industry a reasonable amount of time, and I think you've seen the whole gold industry and the jewellery industry in particular change quite a lot. What can you say have been the main kind of milestones and actions regarding that move towards a more responsible supply chain?
Thank you, John, and thank you for inviting me, and it's an honor and a privilege to share the stage with an eminent set of ladies who are so influential in our industry, and you, John.
Thank you.
I think one of the key differences in our industry was that maybe 20 years ago, the industry was primarily based on trust was the only reference point about how to trade, certainly in the downstream in the jewellery industry. And I think the major change has happened with the establishment of guidance and standards set primarily by the organizations on this panel. So the World Gold Council, the Responsible Jewellery Council, the Watch and Jewellery Initiatives, and I think particularly in the gold industry, the London Bullion Market Association. So a number of years ago, if you were an Italian jewellery manufacturer and you wanted to buy some gold from your supplier bank, it was a seller's option. You had no choice over what gold that would be delivered. But now, primarily due to the LBMA's establishment of their responsible gold guidance and the good delivery standards that they have, you can now go to your bank and say, I want my gold to be LBMA good delivery gold. And you can then be assured that that gold is responsibly sourced and verified as such. And you can then ensure that your suppliers do the same. And that didn't exist 20 years ago. So I think the biggest change has been the establishment of guidance, standards, and verification throughout the industry.
Thanks. And sticking with you for a while, and I should point out this is a discussion, so if anybody wants to intervene, please raise your hand or raise your eyebrow, and I'll try and pay attention. But you mentioned that change. How far have we come? How do you think the wider jewelry industry, gold included, but also the whole kind of complex supply chain, how do you think they're performing as we stand now?
I think the big difference now is that having responsibly sourced product is a requirement. It's an expected throughout our industry. I think the general performance of our industry, we have suffered from our industry somehow being tainted by dirty gold and blood diamonds, etc. And that has been the catalyst for a significant amount of change. And I think that our industry still needs a lot to be done. I think the organizations here do a lot to protect our industry and provide assurance and trust throughout it, but they're not a panacea. I think companies still need to take the responsibility themselves. If you look more recently about how our industry has responded to geopolitical events over the last few years, I think the gold industry reacted very, very quickly to protect the integrity of the gold supply chain. I think other parts of our industry are still trying to address some of those issues. There's still an awful lot of work to be done.
Thanks, and I'm going to come back to you on a few of those points, but I thought, given the fact you were talking about progress and talking about demonstrable evidence of progress, Melanie, I'm going to turn to you. The RJC is probably the key industry certification body, which produces, obviously allows companies to demonstrate and produce evidence of responsible sourcing at least. And I think I quoted that your company states publicly that they see certification as a major milestone on the wider sustainability journey of any jewelry company. Is that milestone, where is that on the journey? Is it the kind of the start to your sustainability journey? Is it evidence that you've reached the destination? Just wondering where you see that trajectory.
Thanks, John. I'd say for me, the journey is the milestone. Just acquiring that mindset where you know that you want to put responsible practice at the core of your business is the first step on the journey and the milestone itself. And then once you have that hunger to learn and to implement, there are so many bodies like ours and others where there's guidance for you to do that. You don't have to do it alone. It is, especially when I speak to smaller members and smaller companies, there is anxiety around it, getting it wrong, being called out in the industry. And I think once you embrace the fact that like all of us are just learning and on this journey together, you can go forward. So for me, and I think for some of our members, definitely going from thinking about it to doing it, to joining an organization, to being a member, to starting looking at principles and SDGs and all of that kind of thing, that is a massive leap. And I see more and more people taking that leap, but they do need help.
Thanks. And the journey is the destination is a good one. I'm going to ask you another question about that. If certification is kind of part of that, what else do you think might be needed? I mean, what is, if you like, missing from, once you've made the leap, how do you go forward?
I think some people think that's it. You know, I've signed up, I've got a scheme, I'm in, but it's just the beginning. You know, the due diligence, understanding that that's where you start and you apply extra layers of understanding. And, you know, just talking to people, talking to all your suppliers. You know, we met some of our members yesterday and they were saying the biggest step for them was going out and talking to all their suppliers. And there's a lot of fear and their suppliers like, I can't manage to look at this. And then over time, you work with your suppliers, then it's like a chain reaction. And then so it's just taking what you know and giving it to someone else. So I do think, for me, the biggest challenge is the fear. Just start to learn, and just talk to everyone you deal with professionally, as well as socially, and just saying like, I'm doing this, and it's actually fine. And if you need help, ask for it. And I think that's the main thing. So we can't be afraid to be wrong, and we can't be afraid to just try something and to try and understand. And I think, you know, when I came into this job, I didn't know much about standards at all. I knew they existed. But in the last year, I've learned a huge amount. But I have to be understanding that I don't know, you know, I'm at the beginning. And that's fine. It's fine for everyone to be at the beginning.
Thanks. One more question for now, and that is, because I mentioned certification, and I know that you're going through a consultation process in terms of reviewing and possibly revising, or maybe expanding the kind of code of practice and so on. Can you give us any preview of what that expansion of code of practice might mean?
That's a naughty question, John, but I like it. And I'm going to go to my notes, because I have lists.
Thanks.
So we are expanding things, as you know, because we are on a 5-year cycle, and things do change significantly in 5 years. And I would say, basically, the biggest thing for us is looking at the practices now, especially around human rights and due diligence. We're expanding things in that area. I mean, I can go into detail if we've got time, I don't know. Okay, let me find my list of things. I think there are elements of modern slavery that we're going into. Oh my God. Sorry. Actually, come back to me on that.
Okay, I'll let you find it and come back to you. I think, so that question is, it kind of reflects something, people who heard me speak before, a hypothesis that I generally say in terms of both the gold supply chain, but also the jewellery supply chain, that there's been a focus on responsible sourcing, getting your house in order, knowing your clients, making sure that, you know, you are at least comfortable with how you source and your suppliers. But my theory, my hypothesis, is that that's not enough, that basically you now need to be, certainly when we talk about sustainability, you now need to be aware of wider impacts and perhaps how you might contribute to those impacts and wider progress. And Iris, I'm going to turn to you because I think the way I see it, please correct me if I'm wrong, that the Watch and Jewellery Initiative is perhaps an expression of that awareness of what we might call externalities, the wider impacts, the wider role of companies and sectors in the world. Could you just comment on that? And I'm quite interested in what do you think drives that vision? What do you think drives the ambition to contribute to those wider impacts?
Well, thank you for the question. I think, first of all, there's a sense of urgency. I would say the time is now, and it might sound as a cliche, but I think we all every day are confronted with the impact of climate, with the impact of biodiversity loss, with conflict in the world, and especially then for our industry, where often originally the sourcing or the materials come from certain regions. We need to be really watching the integrity of the value chain. And when we talk about impact, we also know that no one can do it alone. And there's a very high risk when you have this whole value chain, and when certain companies are not doing the right thing, it disturbs the whole industry image. And so we believe at the Watch and Jewellery Initiative 2030 that it is also a journey. So I fully agree with Melanie that the fact is, you know, you have to have a starting point. I think the difference is that we see the companies that are stepping in are ambitious. And let's be very clear, we need to be humble here. I'm not saying that we're going to resolve all the problems of the world, but I think we have this small, ambitious group of CEOs that are absolutely committed to advance faster and going deeper. And what I mean by that is, and we already talked about it, today what are some of the critical components? We can't disconnect sustainability from science. We need to have data. We need SBTI, and you know it because you chair our climate work. We need to look at what are the risks of biodiversity. If we're talking about colored gemstones and they come from Madagascar, which is a biodiversity hotspot, what does that really mean? Kind of stepping away from risk, but looking at opportunity and positive impact. And then on human rights, I fully share the vision with Responsible Jewellery Council, because when we talk about due diligence, we need everyone involved. You can't take one part of a component of a value chain to do due diligence. So how can we educate and not scare people away, but also give them, I think, the tools, the practical tools, and especially SMEs to bring them on the journey. So we believe, yes, that these companies that have joined want to step up.
Thanks. And I'm interested in it. Okay, sorry, Melanie.
I'm engaging in this conversation.
Please.
Yeah, I really like that idea, and I like the fact that we are looking at areas that we maybe haven't looked at in true focus, like biodiversity has become in the last couple of years really like a really big thing. Also communities, indigenous communities, and there are so many conversations to be had. I think the challenge is how we actually get action going forward. So sort of jumping on what Iris said, you know, what action can we get? That's what frustrates me. Like, there's so much to talk about, but what can we do?
So that's actually set me up for my question. So you can both jump in. Some of these challenges are huge challenges. We're talking about, you know, potentially existential threats, major things. And I think the message that I'd like people to take away is that we kind of have to collaborate. There is no choice or option. We have to come together. But what, for your members, for instance, is a reasonable expectation? I'm aware that there's only so much a particular company can do, a particular industry can do, and how do you balance practicality and realistic expectations with ambition, which will shape the actions, I think, that Melanie mentioned?
I think probably for me joining the initiative has been a particularly interesting experience to, first of all, set up a governance framework that would work so that you can protect the integrity of this group where you have indeed big brands, so high reputation, also smaller enterprises coming in, being part of a coalition. And, you know, I invite you to look at that, what we're doing in that context of governance. But I think what more important is what we learned through working now 1.5 years is the methodology of going from learning to actions and having an accountability mechanism. And for example, I'll be very straightforward. We struggled on the second pillar on nature and biodiversity. First of all, understanding who are the experts out there that actually have a clue on what we are as an industry. Specifically because we've got so many different materials. You know, it can go from leather of a strap of a watch. It can go from colored gemstones, diamonds, silver, gold, lab-grown, all these components. So how can we actually understand what we do? And I think now we've come to a model that works well with, you know, experts bringing us on the journey, companies having to do concrete actions, and we have worked on a system of reporting that we're now launching in the pilot phase, because we find it very important. You know, this is not a free ride. Yes, we're not a standards body, but this coalition is about accountability, and we want to report to stakeholders. And I think some of you might have also seen, you know, when we launched the Human Rights Navigator tool, we worked with Human Rights Watch, who actually assessed it, looked at it, I think helped us make it better. Now we're testing it with SMEs, but we're also very humble. If certain things are not practical enough, we need to adjust. We can't be sitting there thinking, you know, we have the solution. We need to engage and learn from that. So I think, yeah, I'm quite confident now that we're on a good track, but it took us a while to find the way of moving. And then I think we are very privileged. I think you saw that Caring indeed has been again appointed as you know, the top 100 of the index of the Knights. But when you see that, they share a lot. So we see it, they have such expertise and they share. So we see some of these big brands like Chanel, like Cartier, like Gucci, all of them, they share on different topics, also D&I, etc. And we see that the smaller enterprises, they are really have this appetite to learn quicker. So I think we actually the learning journey can go faster. And I think one final point I want to mention is that the Watch and Jewel Initiative 2030 is here to collaborate. So anything that we're building and shaping, we want to give back to the industry. When we feel the quality is good enough, you know, we are happy to share. We're also going to do some pilots, and we want to open up with other associations who want to join. And I just, maybe this is a call for action. We're doing a big pilot on the Corporate Social Responsibility Directive of the EU, because the SMEs who are not impacted directly will be impacted, and we want to bring them on board to get them ready for what's coming.
Thank you. And I mentioned at the start being mindful of the principles. As you will see, Principle 9 is industry-wide collaboration. It's actually an aspiration to drive further collaboration. Talking about the principles, it wasn't purely a narrow initiative. It's been a broad industry-wide initiative, and Sakhila, I'm pleased to say, was part of that right from the start. So it's again a great privilege for us to join us. Sakhila, the LBMA represent a number of quite significant segments, concentrated pivot points, if you will, on the supply chain. So for you and your stakeholders, what does this kind of coming together mean, and how do, I'm thinking of the refiners in particular, how do you think they may respond to this, what will hopefully convergent direction?
Thank you, John. Firstly, I'd like to thank CIBJO for the opportunity bringing this panel together, but also hosting us for the last 2 days and giving me the opportunity to engage with a number of stakeholders about what the gold market is doing. It's been great discussions. And actually, it goes to highlight how such gatherings and bringing people together are so important, not just to have these discussions on stage, but the off-stage discussions, the bilateral, and really understanding, okay, what are your pinch points? This is what we're doing. Are we doing enough? If not, what would you like to see? So that feedback and that opportunity is so invaluable that bringing people together is the absolute basis of how we can progress. So that's a nice precursor to my answer to your question, John. So bringing people together, as far as this declaration goes, has been a huge challenge in order to align mutual challenges, mutual concerns, but also highlight the mutual benefits. And once that was understood, it was actually a walk in the park. But actually getting that understanding out there, the awareness of what we're trying to achieve, was a bit of a bumpy ride in the beginning, if I can say that, John. Yeah. But once we got over that hurdle, it all became really straightforward and really simple. Why? Because we now have, as you've seen from the list that John put up earlier on, a global representation. Obviously the LBMA, World Gold Council, but you've got representation from India, China, Dubai, Switzerland, and various others that I haven't named, that actually we do share mutual challenges, we do share mutual concerns, but also we have had some successes. So here is a platform to learn from each other where those successes have been. And I'm not saying our job is done, but I am saying quite often it's so easy to focus on criticism and challenges, ignoring the fact that actually, what is it that we are doing right and how do you build on that? And then how do you support those that may not understand what still needs to be done? So bringing that declaration together, identifying those priorities across the globe, and then giving the world at large something to reference has been a huge achievement. But the work has only just begun. So at the LBMA, we took the declaration and we launched a 3-year strategy last year. I am a bit of a geek, so I know the strategy inside out. So we have 5 focus areas, which we've grouped into various themes, and we've actually committed to a number of deliverables to reflect on how we're going to be achieving the 10 principles that we've highlighted. So that's the action that we're taking. It's very clear in terms of what our deliverables are. It's also very clear in terms of how we're going to achieve them with various stakeholders being part of the discussion. Going back to my point, we can't do this alone, nor are we saying we're doing this alone. Bringing people together in various parts of the value chain to address all those various principles, as well as our focus areas, is what's going to lead to an achievement and success. But it is a 3-year strategy. That means that at the 3-year point, we sit back, we reflect on lessons learned, we understand what has been achieved, and then we focus on the next part of that journey. So it's continuous improvement, continuously revising, are things working? Because sometimes just because we've set the strategy in 2023 doesn't mean that it's fit for purpose by 2025. You have to respond to a dynamic environment. You have to respond to consumer feedback, stakeholder engagement, governments, civil society. There's a lot of people that want to engage, have that feedback, and you have to be dynamic. You have to be ensuring that we are able to work with those various groups and reflect what is needed. Now, sort of bringing that back to the LBMA members, and in particular, the LBMA Good Delivery refiners, we started this journey 10 years ago with the refiners through our launch of the Responsible Gold Guidance version 1. We are now on version 9. So it's been a constant and continuous road to improvement. It has been challenging. I would say for the first few years, there was a lot of explanation around why is this needed? Why do we have to do this? What is it that we're addressing? And what is the minimum? That's changed, and that's changed quite rapidly to what more can we do? Can we focus on other areas? Can we bring other challenges, other issues? We've already heard about biodiversity, gender, D&I. How do we reflect those issues in what it is that the refiners need to achieve? But again, not alone. How can they engage with the mining community? How can they engage with the downstream, the electronics, the jewellery houses, to make sure that we are doing this collectively and continuously?
Thanks. And I think that point about starting off, you know, the natural response is, what is the minimum? What can I get away with? Moving towards a more positive aspiration, I think, is key. I'm actually just going to come back to you briefly, Philip, because you mentioned explicitly the LBMA in kind of being a bedrock of transparency, if you like. How do you think other sectors, in fact, Sakhila, please jump in too, how do you think other sectors might learn from that if it's needed? Maybe learn from the declaration too, learn from this idea of the sector trying to kind of come together, join the dots, but with your comments on the LBMA front of mind.
Well, I think one of the excellent results of what the LBMA has done, and we're here at the Vicenza Fair, which is predominantly Italian manufacturers who are mostly small and medium-sized, often family-owned businesses, and we were asked yesterday a number of times, how do I validate the sources of my gold? How do I make sure that the gold that I buy is responsibly sourced? And one thing I would say is, looking at the first thing on that list around responsible sourcing, is that the LBMA has been the benchmark for ensuring that you can do that. So if you are a small organization, the message I would like, and you want to start on this progress, is one, read CIBJO's Blue Book on responsible sourcing, and that will give you some basic information. Ensure that you have a policy that all the gold that you source is LBMA good delivery, and ask the same on all of your suppliers. And then if you think you want to be verified against that policy, join an organization like the Responsible Jewellery Council, and then you can demonstrate to your suppliers and your customers that you, not only do you have those policies in place, but you can prove that you are doing it properly. And I think the big difference that other sectors in our industry should learn from that process is, if you establish the choke points or the pinch points, and the LBMA as an organization took the responsibility to say, yes, we acknowledge that the refineries are the choke points in the gold supply chain. And if then they had the scale to do so, because I understand that that accounts for the majority of all the gold that's refined around the world, that provides the confidence that the entire supply chain from then on can rely on. And I think other sectors in our industry should learn from that.
Thanks. And you mentioned kind of the whole supply chain, and I mentioned from mine to market. I'm going to turn to you, Bryony. I think it's, dare I say, I think it's fair to say that many jewellery companies see the biggest challenges and risks in sustainability as being upstream in the production process, the extraction process, the mine site. Now, I personally would argue that that's also where the big sustainability impact opportunities lie, in terms of if you want to make progress on many of those. Newmont has been at the forefront, I think, of both demonstrating an awareness and the need to show demonstrable progress. Would you want to just comment on that?
Yeah, thanks, John, and fantastic to be here. Hi, everyone. Absolutely excited to hear from all the other panelists on that connecting of the dots. I think that if you think of us as all one big industry, the value chain, we've been working hard in silos, and we're starting to see examples like LBMA really start to connect the dots together. And I think, as Melanie was saying, the time is now to start working together on these big outcomes that we don't always have the answers for, but we know now what needs to be done or what outcome we need. So to answer your question, John, absolutely, mining and mineral processing does have broad impacts. They're intensive impacts on people, the host communities in which we mine and operate, and the environment, and of course, as a large industry, on society more generally. So I would say that probably for 20 or 30 years, there's been dedicated sustainability teams, I'll just use that term broadly, on the ground in the larger or more mature mining companies, working on things like land restoration, working on things like water quality, and doing great work in research and development that can be shared more broadly, working with universities on how we can do better. But I think it's really been the last decade or so where we've seen a big shift in the company realising that good sustainability practice is good business practice. And that's something that has been a changing of society. We know external factors have caused people to be host communities, society at large be more aware of what's happening with the state of our environment, the state of our communities. But also we're seeing now that connection to the economy, which is just so critical, and it's a really exciting thing to suddenly see sustainability being pulled by the market. And coupled with that, and because we've talked a lot about LBMA today, organisations like LBMA starting to say, no, actually we need to know what you're doing. And another pull from who we consider our direct customers, who are the smelters and the refiners and the third-party purchasers, buyers, really asking that question. And that's an evidence of how those things start to connect. I think from a really practical perspective, and we brought up accountability earlier, like how do we actually do this on such a scale? We at Newmont, for example, and we are a large, mature organisation, so absolutely a passion of mine is how do we bring in those that have less resources, those that are more junior in this space, to be lifted up with us in how we can be more sustainable. But having a Chief Sustainability Officer position reporting to our CEO for a number of years has really meant that we've been able to have some courageous strategy around sustainability. We've got all of our employees, right down to those that work at mine sites, operators and maintainers, having sustainability goals for their teams. So they are thinking about what can I do in my work every day to be more protective of the environment or work closer with host communities. And while that's not perfect, and we have definitely a long way to go, that's an example of how it becomes part of the conversation, how we work. And really, that is for us the next step in making sure that we're actually protecting the environment, protecting those communities and working with communities that we operate within. So perhaps that's the next step in the journey.
Thanks. I think, Melanie, you wanted to say a few words.
Yeah, I think you mentioned something really interesting for the first time in the talk, is that you mentioned the economy. And I think everything we're talking about here is linked to economics, you know, and the market. We're going to be driven forward, and everything has to work in the market. We can't just have sort of thoughts, which are really good on paper, which don't work in the market, because usable, sort of transferable information has to go into the market. We have to see a desire for change at base level. So I think I would love to see us talk more about economics when we talk about all of this, because without that in the conversation, we're not actually going to get the action that we want. And talking before about some of the changes we've got coming up in our revisions, we're seeing a lot of people ask about carbon, which we didn't see before. So we're making quite a lot of changes and shifting towards carbon sort of possibilities, which we haven't had before really to the same degree. So I think economics and carbon are also two things that I'm seeing a lot more that people move towards as ideas.
Thanks, and that's from the World Gold Council perspective, that's very heartening to hear, given that's where we spend an awful lot of our time. And I think it's worth mentioning, when we're talking about the gold value chain and the whole value chain, how significant and pivotal it is. I understand if you're at one part of the market dealing with consumers and product, you may not see the whole value chain. But it's important to note that gold is almost unique in the metal value chain in the role it can have. And somebody, I think it was Ed yesterday, mentioned about wider impacts and the economic impacts. In many cases, and this is true of climate to some extent too, gold is the catalyzing force in developing economies and frontier economies. It underpins the economy. If you look at Ghana, 25 or 26% of its foreign earnings are gold. That economy absolutely depends to create any other opportunity. It needs that gold. And when it comes to climate, then actually in many, many locations around the world, the gold industry is the first mover. Decarbonizing the mines, you actually start to decarbonize the economy. So sorry for hogging the mic there, but yeah. I think it was a useful point.
John, if I may also, sort of Newmont made a great point in terms of coming together and that connectivity. So one example I like to give is when the LBMA recognized, and vice versa, the World Gold Council RGMPs. And it was so important for the miners to be speaking to refiners, because what we want to avoid is duplication of efforts. So going back to the point about market efficiencies, if there is work being done at a certain part of the supply chain or the value chain, this is not for the LBMA to recreate that. It's for the LBMA to work together to support efficiencies and actually streamline the workload so that it's clear what's happening across the supply chain, but how can we not duplicate efforts here? So streamlining and efficiency has been quite a big priority for the LBMA, but not compromising standards. So there's a difference. We didn't recognize, certain parts of the value chain, so it means that the refiners do nothing. Far from it. It's then for the refiners to understand and get comfortable, and then obviously work with the LBMA in, if we have recognized the RGMPs, what is it that they now need to do to understand how that recognition works? For them to understand, okay, what is the mining company doing in support of the implementation of those requirements? So still a lot of work to do, but without repeating certain efforts that have already been in place.
Thank you. I think it's worth just mentioning the RGMPs refers to the Responsible Gold Mining Principles, which is a set of principles, 51 principles bucketed under 10 overarching principles, covering the whole ESG spectrum for what is material for mining and gold mine production. However, somebody who can talk about it, because she's very much deep in that process, is Bryony. So Bryony.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the RGMPs and the work that LBMA is doing to connect those is a great example of where we need to get to. As I said earlier, connecting those dots so we can work together better. It certainly is a big load when we have quite a dynamic and complex world or universe out there of standards, where I think we have a good understanding now of the big outcomes we're trying to achieve here. And we also need, like I mentioned earlier, that on-ramp for smaller operators, and similar, Philip, what you were saying with smaller jewellers, to be able to actually get into that process and start helping us collectively make a difference. So RGMPs are something that we at Newmont subscribe to as members of the World Gold Council. They don't necessarily drive the work we do, but they certainly give us a good point of reference so that we're able to say these are the things that are important that we need to be making sure that we're achieving. They are essentially criteria-based, and they allow us to make sure that the programs we're spending time and resources on are the ones that there is a greater global ambition to be working towards. So absolutely an opportunity there to be more efficient, I think, but I think that we're working towards that. And again, I think it would be nice to see one day a nice, neat flow in the value chain of how each standard or set of standards connects in with the next one along the value chain, and that we can have that trust of these standards to know that if a company, whether they be a supplier to a mining company or a smelter, if those standards are met, and there is obviously strong governance that needs to be set up around that and transparent reporting, then the value chain can trust that there is work being done towards what we recognise as being important sustainability practice.
Thanks. And governance and transparency, I think something close to your heart, Iris. Do you want to say a few words?
Well, I want to reflect on some of the points that I just heard from my colleagues. I think, first of all, with what Melanie said and Brian, absolutely we need to look at the economics, but we also need to rethink sustainability is actually part of innovation. It's actually about integrating it from the moment you're going to redesign products or redesign value chains. And I think that more and more we will see it. And if I just look at the luxury industry, if they're looking at alternative materials, if they're looking at alternative supply chains, if they're looking at alternative ways of creating in production or manufacturing, it's going to become part of, it's a priority. We can start rethinking from the start. I think at the same time, we also see that there's a huge need for capacity building in the sustainability department. And I'm so happy, Brian, when I hear that you have a chief sustainability officer reporting to the CEO. I think that's the only place it belongs. If it's not at the CEO level, it actually doesn't make sense. It will be at CEO level and board that it will be pushed. And I think a final point I also wanted to make is about governance and accountability. I think one key component that is critical for our industry is we need to become more transparent. We might say we're transparent. Yes, we've made great strides, but we're not transparent enough. So it means is we need reliable data, and it means we need common data, especially if we think about climate and nature, etc. So it means we need to report on the topics that are relevant. And I think I'd like to give an example. You know, within the Watch and Journey Shift 2030, for 15 months, we've been working with like a short, I would say a small expert task force with different players to understand, you know, what is material in the industry, and you know about it, John. What is actually best practice out there? But to come to your point, Melanie, not to scare people off, to give opportunities for companies to start. So actually starting like, what are the baseline? If you want to show some baseline progress, you're an SME, what are some of the indicators that are actually relevant to your business and that you can show progress? And that also is really worthwhile management data to make better decisions in your company. So we've now kind of made a trajectory. Georg Kell has been, our independent board member, has been working with us closely. We're going to launch it, test it, and then hopefully we can share it also with the wider industry to see if this is, you know, a potential way of disclosure. But disclosure is critical, and we know, you know, 150% of regulations has accelerated in the past 10 years. And now everything is about disclosure and reporting. So we need to be ready, and we need to bring everyone on the journey. And before I forget, because I see Gaetano sitting there in front of us, and thank you for your warm hospitality, we've been working very closely on the element of education. If we want companies on board, they need to understand the basic principles. Okay, you could say about what is sustainability, what is responsible sourcing, but also introduction to newer topics like biodiversity and nature. And together we'll be launching a big solutions lab with the Global Compact, because we don't want to reinvent the wheel. They have the biggest library ever in the world on sustainability material. We've made selections on topics that are relevant for the industry. We're now working with experts to translate it more to the industry, and then it can be accessible for everyone for the industry. And I think, again, if we can bring everyone on the journey, it will not scare people off, but hopefully encourage them to step in.
Thank you. And there's a couple of comments there. This aspiration for potentially streamlined coherence, equivalency, if you like, across the value chain, I think is something we're all sort of working on in different ways, but increasingly, hopefully, together. I'd like to just plug work that CIBJO is doing. Philip mentioned the Responsible Sourcing Blue Book, but of course CIBJO is seeking to pull together all of the initiatives, including all of yours, no need to reinvent the wheel, but for a reference point, a foundation, what we're calling an ESG or sustainability roadmap or blue book in development. So watch this space, but the idea is to make it extremely simple to take even your reference points, in fact, all of the people basically on this stage, and say, okay, how do we make this easily digestible for CIBJO members? So again, watch this space. I'm aware we're kind of running out of time, and I can't see many of you in the audience because of the lights, but if anybody has any questions, please raise their hand or make a noise. If not, I have a few final questions that I'd like to ask. So, Ferial, I think it is, sorry. Do we have a microphone, please? Sorry.
Thank you very much, John. And you didn't hear what my husband said, but he said, I'm loud enough. I could potentially ask my question without the mic. You know, for those of you that don't know me, I'm very passionate about these types of discussions. And the more I hear these discussions, the more it dawns on me that we talk about supply chain, but we only focus on the upstream. And actually, if we really talk about collaboration, supply chain, there are many risks upstream, midstream, and downstream. And so when we're talking about biodiversity and climate, Are you guys looking at it as an upstream lens, or are you actually thinking about it from a midstream and downstream lens? And the reason why I ask that is because obviously I represent De Beers here, and we are a mining company. We have a footprint across the full value chain. And we see these risks and opportunities as across the supply chain. There are many downstream issues. There are many midstream issues. But when I hear people talking, it's an us and them thing. And collaboration really is an us thing. So my question is, if the focus is biodiversity, how are you looking at it from a midstream and a downstream perspective? Thank you.
Can I start with that and then pass to you, please? So if it came across that it was an us and them thing, Ferial, that was a failure of this panel, because it's very much trying to be an us thing. And as you heard, we are now all talking. That Declaration of Principles is actually also a forum. So we all meet on a quarterly basis to discuss how to collaborate on those issues. There is going to be the World Gold Council and its members, I think, are fairly ahead of the curve, as you say, upstream on decarbonisation and adaptation resilience. Please jump in. I think that both with CIBJO, with Watch and Jewellery Initiative, and with the Declarations Group, we're actually talking about a sectoral climate plan with biodiversity, early days, but that's the intention. So that's certainly from wearing my 3 or 4 different hats along the gold value chain. That's my perspective. Iris.
Yeah, absolutely, Ferial. So first of all, fully agree. I mean, you can't cut the world into little pieces. We can't cut our supply chain in small pieces. I think from our side, we have, I would call it, 2-path trajectory. And very humbly, I want to say, of course, we've got the coalition with 60 companies who some are advanced already in biodiversity nature, depending where they are. So let's say some luxury brands, okay? And other SMEs in the middle, and then some of your site holders in the middle as manufacturers that's starting some part of the journey. If you want to have a good picture and create a nature roadmap for the industry, of course we have to engage with you, which will happen because we're working in 2 pathways. We've started our work because of the coalition itself, because we want people to start actioning, but at the same time we want to understand better what are really those impacts and who we need to engage with. And I think that's now where we are starting the nature roadmap, which is an initiative that will start, I think, March and April. We'll be writing to all the stakeholders to participate in that, because what we create there is also going to be open for the industry, and again, open for consultation and feedback, etc. But we need to start the journey, and we need to understand already for many of those companies, I think more indeed from the luxury side, where actually materiality happens. And like you said, it's often at the source level. And then the question is, you know, on what you focus, because you could talk about, okay, do we just look at materials and life cycle analysis? No, we're thinking about the landscaping. We're really thinking about landscaping, because one component we should also not forget, you could become like a champion in a certain topic, let's say human, you know, let's say human rights, this is your core corner, but you have to be very careful that you could be having negative impact on biodiversity. So everything is interconnected, and it's really tough. It's really difficult to understand. And I think that's why we're working very much with experts already looking at some of the regions. And luckily, I would say, some of the mining houses present and have done amazing work on climate and nature, and that we hope to build on too. We won't be able to do it alone, but I just want to remember also, I want the audience also to know is that the intersectionality of these topics is super key if we want to get to credible results. And I think that's where we're working with the experts. So no, we will not do it alone. We will definitely engage. And like I said, anything we do is open source for the industry.
Thanks. Just returning to your comment, Ferial, when it comes to climate, certainly we've quantified the carbon footprint of the whole value chain. It is actually 99% in gold, 99% of it is in mining. So maybe I should let you comment on that.
Yeah, sure. And I think it's a really great question. I think that we are at this stage of maturity as a value chain that we're trying to get our own house in order. But absolutely, I think there will come a time where, and this is all in the spirit of this panel working together, I think it will come a time where we will be sharing our lessons with the broader value chain and seeing where we can help each other in achieving this. You know, there's the big fruit, I guess, the big fruit that we're trying to work on now, but there'll be the little things that we need to tidy up to really achieve, especially those the Paris Agreement targets, etc., where we've committed to net zero, you know, there'll be that work to do that we can do together. So for us, those not familiar with mining, we do have large emissions sets coming from mainly our fuels that we use for our equipment and also the electricity that we use in our processing plants. So I think there's two things. One is making tangible plans. So for us, we are busily working, we have a decarbonisation team working with our sustainability team on tangible projects to make dents in our emission factors. And examples are building wind farms, battery electric fleets, those things that make a real dent in the emissions profile. And the other connected and very important part of that is being transparent publicly about the plans, how we're tracking against those plans, what are the projects doing, how are we tracking towards those targets we've set. And the climate world is asking us already to be very transparent, and I think things like the concept of Scope 3, Scope 2 emissions is really sometimes uncomfortable, but means that we have to pay attention outside our gate. And the way that we've found that that's we're starting to make strides in that is really partnering with our, unfortunately, to your point, upstream suppliers mainly, suppliers of chemicals, suppliers of equipment that we use, and really providing a pull on them, an incentive for them to find solutions, to problem solve, to generate ideas on how we can do things better as purchasers of their products. So I think there's some examples of some practical ways that we are trying to make a dent. I think that's the work that needs to be done now, and there's certainly a lot of work there for all of us. And then I think as we strengthen these ties, as I said, connecting the dots in the value chain, we'll be able to really come together and share how we can do that as a whole team, I suppose.
John, just one point I wanted to say to Brian is it becomes very complex because probably you know, SBTi changed some of the concept of their targets, and so you've got companies who set their targets, then there are now new targets, and then you have Scope 3, the suppliers that are lost a little bit. And I think what we've seen till date is working with SBTi. We have like full registration for these webinars, but we also work with like help desk sessions just to get these suppliers to understand small steps and templates and learning, and that's how we see advance. And I'm very proud to say after 1 year, we already know, because we're tracking it, what are some of these steps they're taking, but also some of the pain points. And I think that's also the opportunity for us to maybe go back, and when we do our stakeholder report, to also report on that, how easy was it and how difficult was it, and what can we learn, also especially for the SMEs to bring them on board.
Thanks. I'm aware of time. We started a little late, so I'm going to stretch it a little, unless they tell me not. Melanie, you had a...
I just wanted to sort of slightly come at a different place. I mean, at the RJC, because I think our strength is, and the challenge is that we go across the whole supply chain, we try and look at and understand all of the issues as one sort of elongated topic. And from what I can tell, it's about education and communication, because we know that there are very complex issues. We've been talking about them. But I met a lady yesterday here from Haiti, and she said, I follow all of these companies online. And she goes, I get all my information from Instagram, and I'm inspired. I was inspired to come here. Alyssa I had a long chat with her yesterday, and just be part of something. And I think we can't underestimate, everyone in this is so deeply entrenched that people from parts of the world are coming here just to be part of a movement, and we inspire people. So we just have to keep the message as simple as possible so those people can actually feed into it. And I think that is what made me want to get involved. So we've got the actions, which are very complicated and often legal and quite, and then we've got what people understand we're actually doing. And I think we have to concentrate on educating on a base level, because it's still overwhelming for a lot of people, and they want to do something.
I think it's a good point to end on. I think you used the phrase inspiring a movement, which is certainly an ambition, but it's a good point, a good tone to end on. So I'd like to thank my panelists for that, I think, really engaging and insightful discussion. I'd like to thank you for your attention, and look forward to hopefully speaking to you next year. Thank you.